My name is Mike Van Driel, and I am the director of our Perfusion business here in the region in Europe, Middle East, Africa. Obviously, I'm speaking on behalf of all of industry today. So, it is, definitely something that I wanted to share. That when I was talking with the organizers of the European board, and I do want to thank the European board for the opportunity to present on our behalf. I'm speaking on behalf of everybody in industry this morning. I felt like it would be, or we felt it would be appropriate for you guys as an audience to really kind of understand that everything that you see and hear in the news about what's happening with with product supply, what's happening with the lack of transport, labor shortages. Certainly our industry is not immune to that. And in the timing of a presentation like this, coming on the heels of what Christian just presented. When you're talking about labor shortages, when you're talking about the inability to really, to address the actual need for, in this case, for ECMO, but to be able to not be able to address that market need is something that we, as a company, and all medical device companies have been struggling with. And I thought, with this presentation, I actually did a version of this presentation at the Canadian Cardiac Surgery Congress in June. And it really did help put some perspective with a lot of you guys as well as the cardiac surgeons in terms of helping to understand this. Our medical device industry is not immune to the same things that you hear in the news about what's happening with all the other companies or just with product supply in general. So, you guys are at ground zero of COVID, right? It broke out here. And when that happened, that was, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was in early February. As that started to happen, as it started to expand throughout all of Europe, that obviously started impacting us. And as you guys were doing more and more ECMO, and we saw the cardiac surgery cases really just kind of cut in half almost overnight, one of the things that started happening was that we started talking to the regulators about, well, we've got devices that could be helping. The FDA was extremely supportive in giving us temporary approval on some devices in the United States, and we were able to fast track some of the other systems, as were some of the other companies. Like we all, as industry, were able to use this as a way to help make sure you guys were getting better technology as ECMO started spiking. And one of the things that I found really somewhat surreal was that, my team specifically based in Europe, we were talking with Professor Ranucci. We were in contact with the guys in Hanover. We were really close to what was happening in the field with you guys with ECMO. All of a sudden, this explosion of ECMO cases meant that we were all fighting, all of us as manufacturers, we were all fighting for polycarbonate. We were all fighting for PVC for the ECMO, for the ECMO circuits. We were all fighting, especially for fiber. And we found ourselves really in a situation to where all the other parts of some of industry, everything, all the elective cases just went away, right? So, I was hearing about, and we all laugh about it now, but it drove us all crazy. We would be hearing about some of the other divisions where, they'd be having, morale boost kind of conference calls and Zoom calls that were like aperitif calls. And we were all working just like you guys. And we were working from pretty much from 6 in the morning until midnight, trying to figure out how do we take the limited and scarce product that we have and get it out to everybody to make sure that all the ECMO cases that needed to get done were being done. And I still live in, excuse me, I still live in Mirandula. And, just talking to some of the colleagues, from LivaNova, from Eurosets, everything that was happening at that time, we were all just as frazzled and stressed out as you guys were because we were trying to keep up with product demand at the same time. Now, one of the things that really was also happening, and I'm going to come back to this topic, is that we're also internally within our industry, we're dealing with the medical device requirements, the new MDR, which is a new way of CE marking product. And right as this hit, Brexit was kind of being implemented. So for us to be able to get product out of Europe and into the UK for ECMO, it became exceptionally complicated, mainly due to the customs requirements, the custom limitations. And then when COVID broke out in the UK, there was a massive breakout with the customs agents. So literally for 2 or 3 weeks, no one could ship any ECMO product into the UK. And that was just a taste of what was to come. But a good example of how we as a group started kind of pivoting towards how can we help. One thing that was really great was that we make respiratory devices with a division that used to be a part of Covidien, Mallinckrodt Covidien. They do respiratory care in Mirandula. And the equipment is made in the United States, but Ferrari, because it's so close to where our facility is in Mirandula, they actually said, hey, we want to help. What can we do to help? And I was in on some of the calls where, the guys in Maranello at Ferrari actually said, hey, we can build ventilators, right? And I thought, oh man, that's freaking cool. I mean, can you imagine walking into an ICU and actually seeing the Cavalli, the black horse from Ferrari on these ventilators. So they actually did make a lot of these. So if you happen to see a Ferrari sticker on one of these things, you'll know where it came from. But as we all got, as we all got kind of into that sort of kind of sweet spot to where wave after wave after wave, all three waves that came, we were kind of trying to figure out how do we start dealing with some of the things that happen even within our, within our clean rooms or even within the shipping companies that we use. We started having massive breakouts in places like we had one in Mirandola within one of the factories. We had another one that happened in Brooklyn Park where we make the oxygenators. We had another one in Tijuana, and we had one in Kerkrade. So when we started seeing all of these things start happening even within the theaters, like within our manufacturing areas, well, then you start saying, well, we're going to have to implement spacing, like putting space in between everybody inside the clean rooms. Well, that automatically, when you think about, we don't just have space to expand out into these clean rooms, so that overnight cut our capacity down on oxygenator building by 50%, right? And that happened across the board. It happened with all of us as manufacturers, and now we're starting to get into this, okay, not only are we having to deal with these production capacity issues, but as things started coming back, now we're having to deal with all of these issues on the capacity that got cut down, not just with us, but with the companies that we use to ship out of the United States, or even companies that we use, trucking companies within Europe that we use to send the products all over the place with UPS, TNT, all these shipping companies. And in fact, one of the things that also started happening right around the same time, unfortunately, was that the fighting broke out in Russia in the Ukraine. Now you can say, well, I mean, okay, we can understand from a raw material standpoint, how does that hurt? Well, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But the thing about as we were hearing what was happening with you guys in the hospitals about labor shortages, about not being able to be able to really keep up with the demand of these patients that were coming in, we were having the same kind of a problem, but in a different context, not being able to get the kind of, to be able to keep our staff complete, if we weren't dealing with breakouts of COVID even within our factories. The stay-home order also kept people very, very distant, very, very completely connected from those clean rooms. So when we would have issues, we would have to set up these Zoom calls with people from all over the world trying to figure out what we were going to do. It became a new way of working that was just as stressful as what you guys were dealing with in the hospitals. But when you come back to some of these other elements around MDR and the Ukraine and some of the other things that have been happening, all of these kind of led to three major areas. And these are the three buckets that continue to persist today. That we all as suppliers are all having trouble with. Now, on the semiconductor side, that affects, that's obviously because of what's happening with China. Most of the silicone that's used in the chips and that's used in electronics, a lot of that actually comes out of China. And as China opens up, shuts down, opens up, shuts down, it means that there is a chip shortage, right? Because that same silicon that is used, not silicone, but silicon that's used in the chips, it's also used in our silicone tubing. It's used in our, in the retrograde cannula, the inflating balloons. We use it all over the place. And as that supply is pretty much at 50% of what it should be, we're struggling just like all the other chip manufacturers. The car manufacturers are fighting with being able to deliver. We're having the same problem with equipment. Well, that petrochemical thing, especially when the fighting broke out in the Ukraine, that has a huge impact on us as well, because most of the plastics, remember, that all does come from oil. And using fracked oil is exceptionally difficult for a lot of the plastics manufacturers that do biomedical plastics. So that means that your limitations in terms of not being able to use oil that's fracked, that limits you to a handful of countries, and one of them was Russia. So there's been a massive petrochemical shortage, and on top of that, there was also a massive packaging shortage that thankfully we seem to have gotten through. A great example of the packaging shortage, one thing that happened with UPS, right, or with Amazon started delivering all over the place, right, as everybody got closed down and shut down at home. Well, the cardboard demand never dipped. So we as manufacturers all went down in terms of what we were shipping, but Amazon went up. So for the cardboard manufacturers, that manufacturing line kind of stayed the same. Then we all came back and there was no capacity. They didn't have the ability to be able to say, okay, well, you guys are going to resume packaging. Well, here's the cardboard. We literally came back to work and found that we had to wait 6 months for some of the orders that we had just on cardboard. And that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with on a weekly basis. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about MDR, but one of the things that I think on behalf of industry I need to ask you guys for is continued patience, because we are dealing with a lot of the same material shortages. The biomedical industry is not any different than anything else you're hearing on television in terms of, like being able, like all these product shortages. It takes 2 years for a car to get delivered. You can't go and get a new PC because of the shortage on chips. But it also meant that we as companies also have been moving towards more vertical integration. And what I mean by that is that, as an example, what we've done in-house, we're now starting to make our own fiber for oxygenators, because we're just too exposed by being completely dependent on one manufacturer that we all share. A lot of the other companies in our industry are doing the same thing, where they're looking at bringing molding in-house, looking at opportunities to do extrusion in-house. We're all doing the same thing, so that we're less reliant on other companies or on other technologies that may be outside our field of expertise, but that it's safer and it's more secure for us to bring in-house. But what about MDR? So for those of you that don't know what MDR is the change of the MDD to, which is the current CE marking, to the new way of doing CE marking. And what it means is that it does mean that there's a lot more burden on us as manufacturers to have to be able to substantiate the claims of the devices that we put on the market. It's relevant to everybody outside the European Union, because all of us as manufacturers, we all use the CE mark to be able to sell those products into other countries. So if you're saying, well, look, I work in Pakistan, that's not going to affect me, it does affect you, because our CE mark is used to be able to do a short path to be able to get product into a non-EU country. We all use the same pathways. The cost obviously is unavoidable, right? That does mean that because of all these extra regulations, there's going to be an impact on cost. When you factor in what's happening with inflation, when you factor in what's happening with the raw materials, we can see on ourselves the price of oil, what's happening with the impact when you go and fill up your car. You can see that every day. That's going to impact us, and the regulations are as well. But the important thing is that it doesn't just affect current products, it actually affects the products that we're developing. It means that, for instance, for cannula is a great example, right? So cannula was actually upclassed to the equivalent of a heart valve. So think about that. It means that under these new regulations, we have to do a clinical trial to release a new cannula, just like you do with in a pathway and have that kind of clinical evidence to be able to support the claims that we put in the IFUs on that product. Now, we all understand the reason we're doing this is to make sure that the patients that we have get the best possible care. But that does place an enormous burden on the manufacturers in terms of the way that we were doing self-regulation under the current CE mark to now a system that's a lot more like the FDA, and a system that also requires clinical follow-up once we actually have the product CE marked. My takeaway message here is really that, from the standpoint of our ask as manufacturers, and I hope my fellow manufacturers won't mind me, kind of preaching this on our collective behalf, but I do talk to everybody, our community from the manufacturing side. It's very tight-knit. And the one thing that we all struggle with is we ask you guys, this is more about caseloads. This is not about stocking shelves. A great example, coming back to this example of the Ukraine, you guys realize that the one place where almost all the biomedical, the stainless steel 316 is the stainless steel we all use on temperature probes. We use it in cannula. You guys know where that came from? The biggest factory for medical grade was in Mariupol. All right. So when Mariupol was unfortunately severely damaged during the fighting there, it meant that the global supply on 316s, just on stainless steel 316, like that, went away. Went from something to zero within a week. So we collectively, all of us, had to scramble to try and figure out, all right, 316s used on temperature probes on every single oxygenator, right? We use 316 on every single one of these stainless steel pediatric arterial cannula. So these kind of situations are happening week by week. My ask and our ask collectively will continue to be, you guys need to think about you telling your sales reps and telling the people that you know within the manufacturers, what do you guys need to make sure we're not canceling cases? Because the priority needs to be, with the limited amount of material that we're getting, with all the issues that we're having shipping, with the, and certainly The challenge is trying to even get people back into our factories to work. We're having the same problems that all the other manufacturers are having in getting people to come back to work. We've had a permanent 20% decline rate on applications just in our facility in Kerkrade in terms of manufacturing for packs, 20%. So we're all facing the same problems. Our ask is that we need you guys to communicate what the value is, or the important number on caseloads. The expectation, this is going to go on for at least a year, guys. I mean, certainly as long as the Ukraine conflict is going to be going, it's pretty likely that that's going to impact us as well. But on top of that, the issue around shipping and the capacity problems that some of the shippers are having, that's not going away anytime soon. The challenge on us getting PVC and additives, some of those additives come from East Europe as well, right, when we make PVC. Another one of the additives that was in the EOPA cannula that we just found out, that company just went bankrupt. They flat out said, we can't make this stuff anymore. We're dealing with that like at least once every week. All of us are. And we would ask the continued patience, and let's just focus on caseloads. You guys tell us what you need, but it's going to be like this for a while, so we do ask for your patience. And I hope that I didn't overspeak and I didn't go too long, but thank you. I really do appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to express this stuff today. Thank you.